Most of the migrants we get, illegal migrants we get, come from 3 countries: Haiti, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic, maritime migrants. But in addition to that, to answer your question, we do get them along the West Coast. Typically, they would be Mexican migrants coming from the West Coast, making their way across, or Central American migrants who are coming out of Mexico and making their way across. We also get some of those same ones in the Gulf of Mexico. We very rarely get any up the East Coast by maritime means. At one time we did. If you go back about 10 or 12 years ago, Chinese migrants were coming in to the northern states, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. But they were talking about voyages where they could be 6 months long. So those were really long and dangerous voyages on some real rust buckets that were, the living conditions were so hard you couldn't even imagine them. I'm not so sure that people always know how much danger is involved in there. If you have never been to sea before, you cannot even begin to imagine the dangers associated with that. Many of the migrants we come across have never been to sea until they actually went out there and tried to get smuggled across the ocean. They have no idea how dangerous that is. They have no idea that they need a life jacket. They have no idea that how unstable a vessel can be. They have no idea what they're looking at in many cases. And when they do, perhaps it's out of desperation, and if they're desperate enough, people that are desperate enough will try dangerous things, depending on the person and what their tolerance is for danger. But I think in many cases, it's simply a matter they have really no idea what they're getting into when they start out. We've actually seen maritime migration into the United States going down the last several years. And again, I think that's primarily because we have been so successful in catching and prosecuting smugglers. And we get great cooperation from the other countries. We get great cooperation from Haiti, from the Dominican Republic, from Mexico, even from Cuba, a country which we don't have the best of relationships. But nonetheless, when it comes to migrant smuggling and illegal migration, we have very good relationships. We're always looking at, when we come across a migrant vessel, typically, what we're finding is it's grossly overloaded. People have no safety gear, they have no life jackets on. The vessel is very unstable. So our first response is always to make sure that the safety of the migrants is ensured. In that regard, we typically will send 2 boats over, one for each side, so that people do not rush to one side or the other in order to be able to, when they first see the boat, which would increase the instability and perhaps cause it to capsize. Once we have 2 boats alongside, we give the migrants life jackets so that everybody can, in case anybody does fall in the water, we can pick them up safely. We then bring them aboard one at a time onto our small boats, and then bring them on board our cutter. And once on board the cutter, what we do is we do a quick triage for any medical concerns, so that if anybody is in need of first aid, we can take care of them immediately. If somebody is more seriously injured than that, we can get them ashore to a doctor as quickly as possible. Once we have that, we have an accounting system by which we determine who we have on board, how many, what their situation is, and then we set them up with toiletries, if they're going to be aboard for any period of time, bedding, and we have set up portable toilet facilities and be able to take care of them in that regard. It's also a 7/24 security situation, so we have to make sure that everybody is kept safe and secure. We feed them 2 to 3 times a day, depending on how long, again, we're going to have them on board, and we try and make them as comfortable as we possibly can. And meanwhile, if any of the migrants do indicate that they have a fear of prosecution or persecution from whence they came, those migrants will get an interview with a U.S. government official who can do that. Coast Guard can't do those interviews because we're not qualified to do that. But our Immigration Naturalization Service is, and we bring an agent aboard to be able to do those interviews. Haitians rarely use smugglers. but rather they would overload a boat and try and make their way across. Dominicans use smugglers or not, but again, the distances are so small and the opportunities are so great that you don't always need to have a smuggler in order to be able to do that. Smugglers are the ones who are using the go-fast vessels. They're the ones that can get you there fast. If you're doing it yourself from those countries, you don't have access to a go-fast vessel. So you're trying to do it in some homemade vessel that you've built on the beach that may or may not be able to make the transit there. So it's a huge safety issue, but a different safety issue. The safety issue now is that, will that boat even make it across the ocean, as opposed to, will it run aground, or will it hit something, or will it turn over because the smugglers are going too fast? Well, we have laws that make illegal migration, that make it illegal, so that we can actually prosecute, and especially that we can prosecute smugglers. That's the most important part. We have to be able to prosecute the smugglers, and we've been pretty successful in that regard of recent times. And by being able to actually put them in jail, that takes them off the streets. It allows us to seize their boats, and then that's less opportunities for the smugglers to be able to do something, to continue in their illegal trade. That's not universally across the board. And a big challenge always is the fact that migrants oftentimes will not testify against the smugglers. So that gives us another challenge in order to be able to show that there's actually a smuggling operation involving the exchange of money or some sort of remuneration for the smuggler. What we're talking about oftentimes is grossly overloaded boats with low stability, being operated by people who really have no business operating a boat because they're just inexperienced and don't really know what they're doing. They have no safety equipment aboard. So if they, and of course they're not telling anybody they're going from point A to point B, so consequently, if they get in distress, they have no means of which to call for help, and then they really can get themselves in trouble. It become very dangerous in that regard. The other way it can become a deadly and dangerous business is if a vessel is going very fast, at night, no lights, it's easy to collide with somebody else. It's easy to flip a boat if you make a turn too fast. If you could run it in the rocks that you weren't aware that they were there because you were traveling so fast, and sink, causing people to drown. Any one of a number of ways that can happen. But it always really comes down to the fact that the smugglers really don't care at all about the welfare of the migrants. And if they did, then they probably wouldn't have that safety issue as being such a big, huge issue, but it is. That they're going to take a boat into a country, what we call a go-fast boat. That's a boat that will travel between 40 and 60 nautical miles an hour, very fast, be able to bring a bunch of people on board that they have prearranged, and then drive them as quickly as they can across the water into the United States. Because of the distances involved, this may only take a matter of a few hours for them to make that transit, or may take several hours, but it's a very short distance, it's a very short period of time, and if they go fast enough and go at night with no lights, hard to see, that's the most common one. Another one is simply to try and blend in with the normal recreational traffic. You pick up a couple of 2 or 3 migrants, you keep them below decks, you just go in with all the rest of the traffic going in and out of port. Very difficult to determine, and that vessel's engaged in migrant smuggling. So that's another modus operandi. We are charged with deterring illegal migration to the degree that we can, and when it occurs, that we are able to respond and repatriate those illegal migrants who do not have a credible fear of return to their source country as soon as we can. And so being charged in that regard, we forward deploy our forces in order to be a visible deterrent so that migrants will not undertake this very dangerous evolution and try to cross the water into the United States in what is typically a very unsafe vessel, having absolutely no safety gear on board, being run often by inexperienced mariners who really don't know what they're doing, and by smugglers who really don't care at all about the welfare of the migrants, treating them really much like contraband of some sort, and they don't care whether or not they're injured or get hurt in the transit. The challenges are generally speaking that it's a highly profitable business. There's oftentimes that the penalties are not very great for migrant smuggling unless migrants actually get killed or hurt badly. So there's very little incentive for them not to, for smugglers not to take this chance. It's very low cost operation. The ocean is huge. There are so many different ways that you can get into a country from another country undetected. And so it's very hard from that standpoint for the government on both sides, from the country from which they're the origin country, as well as the country of destination, to actually be able to pick them up from the time they're leaving until the time they're arriving. So they can go any of many directions. There are no, not unlike on the land where there's only certain roads at places you can go. On the water, you can go anywhere. So the challenge is being able to detect them, and then to be able to stop them, and then to be able to safely take them off and return them from whence they came. And it also involves the cooperation between governments, which is always a challenge because governments have different laws, different regulations, different ways of doing things. So that's one of the things that we work through a conference like this in order to be able to understand better what each of us are doing and how we can better cooperate.